Thank you for attending our 2021 Virtual Gardening Green Expo. The Expo is sponsored by WaterSmart South Shore, the North and South Rivers Watershed Association, Kennedy's Country Gardens, Wild Ones South Shore Mass Chapter, and Edible South Shore and South Coast.
Hello, my name is Janice McPhillips, and thank you for joining me today for a backyard composting workshop. I work at Holly Hill Farm, which I hope many of you know is located in Cohasset. We are an organic vegetable, flower, and herb farm, and we grow seedlings for sale at our annual plant sales in April and again in May. And we do education programs on the farm as well as off the farm in school gardens around the South Shore. And today I'm going to talk to you about composting in your backyard and how that relates to your garden, whether it be a vegetable garden, a flower garden, some fruit trees, any kind of tree. So I presume that we are all here interested in gardening and growing things. And from a food grower's point of view, just a reminder that the earth, as you all know, is 3/4 water. And the rest of the remaining land, some of it is mountaintops and deserts and snowy places that are not capable of growing food. So there's actually a very little bit of the earth that is available to us to grow food. And we are currently growing food for 7 billion people and soon to be 9 billion. So we need to take good care of our soil, whether you're a gardener or someone who's interested in the political state of the world and climate change and whatnot. Soil is a political issue as well as an environmental issue. And this picture is a representation of that. So just a quick review of soil science, and this is a cross section of soil layers from the top way down to the bedrock layer. And as you all know, if you've ever dug a hole in your yard, you know that you're going to hit rocks in this area. In fact, the name Cohasset comes from a Native American word, long rocky shore. Lots of rocks in this part of North America. Not a lot of topsoil because, as you know, when the glaciers retreated from this part of North America in about 10 or 12,000 years ago, it took a lot of the topsoil around with it and deposited all along where Cape Cod is right now. So we have to work extra hard to build up our soil, build up a topsoil layer that we can grow things, whether it's a carrot like this picture, or as I said, whether we're growing grass or trees or whatever. And there's different layers with different names as you go down deeper and deeper. But this is basically what a cross section of soil looks like. So if you've ever dug up some soil, I'm sure you know that soil looks different depending on what it's made out of. Certainly has a different color, may have a different texture. And this different composition is what makes some soil more suitable for growing food or flowers or trees or whatever. But as you can tell in this picture, the hand on the left is holding some soil that's much more brown in color than the soil on the right. Looks kind of chalky, maybe clay. If you were to do a soil test on the soil on the right, my guess is that you wouldn't find that that's a very healthy soil sample. And the one on the left is much more healthy. Anything that's dark brown is rich in organic matter. So move over to that picture on the right and you'll see those two side-by-side samples. The one on the right of the two of them is 5% organic matter compared to the reddish brown one on the left, 1% organic matter. What is organic matter? Well, organic matter is the part of soil that is from decomposed living things. Carbon molecules, long chain carbon molecules are what comprise organic compounds. And the higher your organic matter, the healthier your soil. And more organic matter in soil will prevent what is going on in this picture at the top right here. I don't know if you can tell, but it's a picture of soil that has been rained on. And you can sort of see there's the beginnings of a little rivulet where the water kind of ran off and the water was not absorbed into the soil. And unfortunately, when soil runs off like that, it takes nutrients and topsoil with it. That is not a good thing. One of the reasons why adding compost to soil is so beneficial is because it helps soil hold on to water so that what you see in this picture here does not happen. So if you were to do a soil test on your soil, you would find out that it's comprised mostly of air and water, pore space made by worms wiggling through your soil and whatnot, and water. But there's also a good amount of mineral content of your soil. It's the stuff that is just decomposed bits of rocks and whatnot, and sand particles and rocks and things like that. Minerals are things that are not alive, whereas organic matter is decomposed living things, dead parts of roots, dead parts of plants, dead animals that have decomposed and are in the soil. Then you've got your microorganisms and your roots, and your stable organic matter is the stuff that's in the soil that is long chain carbon-based molecules that is called humus, and that is a good thing in your soil. You want more humus in your soil. And why do you want more humus? Well, in this picture, the little rusty bits are the soil minerals. And the green bits are little bits of organic matter, and the blue bubbles and the little blue arrows is water moving through your soil. Well, organic matter is actually sticky, and the more organic matter that you have in your soil, the more the water that percolates through the soil will be stuck to those bits of organic matter, and they will stay put in the soil. So that picture I showed earlier of water running off the soil will not happen. We want, for when it rains, we want the water to stay in the soil. We don't want a flood, we don't want a muddy mess, but we want the soil to absorb the water that either comes from rain or when we water to stay put. Okay, so now let's dive in. So what actually is compost? Well, for you wordsmiths out there, just so that you know, compost is both a noun and a verb. The compost is the physical stuff. It is the decomposed living things that are made by an intentional process or something that can happen out in nature, where you take leaves, any kind of animal manure, not any kind of animal manure, manures from herbaceous eating animals like horses, donkeys, cows, things like that, not dogs or cats. So you would make a mix of leaves and horse manure, cow manure, kitchen scraps, grass, and other yard waste. Let it decompose, and the physical stuff that comes from that process is compost, also known as humus, decomposed living things, okay? And the process of doing that is composting. So you could say to someone, after you're done eating that apple core, make sure you compost it. So it's both a noun and a verb. So I like to remind people of all the great reasons why you would like to consider making compost. It's basically a very local form of recycling, taking those nutrients in that apple core that you've eaten and turning it into a very useful product that you can use locally. Unlike recycling your newspaper that involves going to off-site to a paper recycling plant or a plastic recycling plant, you can make compost right there in your backyard and recycle those nutrients. And as a result, any of that food scraps that you're not putting in your trash will save money on garbage disposal costs. In this part of the state, our trash goes to a waste to energy burn plant called Covanta CMAS, which is located in West Wareham, Massachusetts, where our trash is burned. We don't have landfills in this part of the state. The closest landfill around here is Middleborough. So if people live in that part of Massachusetts, that trash is landfill, but most trash is burned around here. So anyway, if you are not burning trash, then you're saving on the emissions from that waste energy burn plant. And but if you are living in a place where your trash is landfilled, then hopefully you've heard that burying organic waste in a landfill, actually the stuff will not decompose, and decomposing organic matter that is trapped in a landfill actually will not decompose, and it'll also give off methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas, which is a bad thing. So it's really good to not throw food scraps in the trash and compost them instead. And the byproduct, the physical compost that you get when you're done composting, can be used on your garden, on your grass, and your favorite tree. I don't have to have a vegetable garden to use compost. You can put it anywhere outside and use that instead of a fertilizer that might be made out of fossil fuel. And it also improves the health of your soil. Improves the structure of the soil, and like I showed in that picture, will increase water permeability and decrease water runoff, decrease that likelihood that the water will run, take off nutrients and topsoil. When it rains, the water will stick to the organic matter in the soil, like I showed in that earlier picture. There's also some recent evidence that adding compost can reduce plant diseases, certainly will neutralize your soil pH, and as I said before, can increase the soil's water holding capacity. I read somewhere recently that for every 1% increase in soil organic matter, an acre of soil can hold on to 27,000 additional gallons of water, which, given that we've had many summers in the past few years that have a lot of drought conditions, anything you can do to increase your soil's ability to hold on to the precious resource of the little bit of water that may come from rain, that is a good thing. And building that soil organic matter is a form of carbon sequestration. You've probably heard that term. Those long chain carbon-based molecules are made of carbon. And so there is all this awareness now of the fact that we can possibly sequester carbon in our soil. In fact, there's talk of trying to figure out a way to quantify that and possibly pay farmers for some kind of a carbon sequestration process, which kind of like a cap and trade system. I don't know where that stands right now, but it's just something that people are working on. And then this last one, number 10, is probably the most important. The benefit of adding compost is that you're adding beneficial microorganisms to your soil. The microbes that decompose the food waste or the animal manure or the leaves in a compost pile then get added to your soil, and that is a great thing. So here's some information from Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection waste audit that happened in 2019. And they estimate that almost 30% of what is thrown away at that waste to energy burn plant, that Covanta CMAS that I mentioned earlier, almost 30% of it is actually compostable food waste or paper. And by compostable paper, that means paper towels, napkins, tissues, things like that, not newspaper. So that's a pretty hefty sum. So basically, they estimate that 30% of what is sent to this burn plant could have been composted. Now, I live in Hingham, so and I'm on my town's recycling committee, so I have these numbers from our town, and I know that in 2019, the town disposed of, believe it or not, 5,444 tons of trash. So if 30% of that was compostable food waste, that makes 1,633 tons of compostable food waste that should have been could have been composted. And back in 2019, they were paying $83 to send trash to Covanta CMAS. That adds up to $135,000 that was paid to recycle. Paid to burn something that could have been recycled. So this is not only a big environmental issue, it's a big budget issue for towns. Another reason why making compost at home makes great sense. So how do we do this? Okay, here's a great graphic from the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. You can get this off their website, or if you saw at the beginning of my talk, my contact information is there. And I can email this to you if you'd like. It's basically a how-to compost recipe. And as you can see, they recommend that you take 3 parts by volume of brown ingredients to 1 part by volume of green ingredients. And there's a list here of what's brown and what's green. Make sure the material is moist because the microbes that are living in the pile need water so that they can live. It shouldn't be wet, sopping wet. It should feel like a wrung out sponge. So you want a little bit of moisture in your compost pile. If you need to water it with a hose, then so be it. Leave it someplace where the rain will fall on it. That's fine, as long as you don't have a soupy, muddy mess. Add some soil microbes, and by that what I mean is just take a shovelful of soil every so often as you're building a pile and put it in mixed with in the mix there, and that will add microbes to your decomposing food waste and leaves and whatnot. Stir it every once in a while, and after maybe as short as 2 months, you will have some black gold. That is what gardeners refer to compost as. So just another review of what's green and what's brown ingredients. The green are the nitrogen-rich materials and the brown are the carbon-rich materials, but don't let the color fool you, because coffee is brown in color, but coffee grounds are actually more rich in nitrogen than they are in carbon, so they are considered a green. And by manure, as I said here earlier, you want any animal that is a vegetarian, it's a vegetarian diet. So that would be horses, cows, bunnies, goats, things like that. And seaweed is a great nitrogen-rich material to add to a compost pile, as are grass clippings. And the brown carbon-rich materials are things like leaves and sawdust, shredded newspaper, paper towels, things like that. You can use newspaper in a compost pile if you're building a compost pile in the spring or the summer and you don't have a pile of leaves. By all means, take your Boston Globe, your Patriot Ledger. I know the Boston Globe is printed with a soy-based ink, which is not toxic and will not cause any problems. The finished compost that comes from that soy-based ink will not be a problem in your vegetable garden if you're worried about that. I don't know about the Patriot Ledger. I know the New York Times is also printed with soy-based ink. You probably don't want to put any glossy ads, the magazine section of the newspaper or the glossy print parts of the paper, because that can have, the paper itself is treated differently, and I'm not actually sure about the ink on that. So I would just use the paper, the newspaper part of the paper. So this is how I collect my compost in my kitchen. That's my kitchen top compost container, and I put my coffee cup in there for scale so you can see. It's relatively pretty, so it sits on my counter, and I fill that up a couple of times a week. And I bought that at Gardener's Supply, but you can get all kinds of different pretty ceramic ones or different designs, many different places. And how do you do it? Well, like that graphic said, you just take layers of brown carbon-rich materials like leaves, cardboard, shredded up newspaper, and greens, nitrogen-rich materials, 3-to-1 by volume, and then mix away. Add a shovelful of soil every 8 to 12 inches to add those microbes. Make sure it's moist and stir it. Here's the do not add list. So no meat, no dairy, no bones, no fatty foods. Like you don't want anything like a salad, even though it's a plant, this, that's lettuce and carrots and whatever you put in your salads, but you don't want the salad dressings. You don't want dog or cat waste. I would not recommend putting any weeds that have gone to seeds. And the reason for that is because those weed seeds will persist in the compost. And then when you use the compost in your garden, you'll be spreading those weeds. There's also a lot of weeds that spread by rhizomes. And depending on what you have in your yard that you're putting in your compost, you may not want to put it in there because if they don't decompose, if the heat, the compost pile isn't hot enough, it may not kill those weeds or those rhizomes that can spread. And then you're going to spread that all around your garden when you use that compost. Same thing with diseased plants. Unless your compost pile is getting very hot, chances are you will not be killing any diseases. Okay, so where to put this compost pile? Well, I would recommend putting it someplace flat if possible and near where you're going to use it. So in a convenient place near to where your house is so that it's easy to get to take your food waste out to. And ideally in the shade. A lot of people think that a compost pile will heat up because the sun heats it up. That's not true, actually. The microbes that are living in the compost pile and doing the work of decomposing the food waste are generating heat as they are decomposing that food waste, and that's where the heat comes from, not from the sun. In fact, the sun can actually dry out a compost pile, so you're better off putting it in the shade if possible and near a water source so it doesn't dry out. You can always, reach a compost pile with a hose. That's very convenient. So let's start with the simplest thing first. So on the right there is just a plain old, built up compost pile. Looks like some leaves, and it looks like a pumpkin there on the left, and just sort of a roughly mixed pile. The only problem with something like this is, especially with these pieces of food scraps showing, that to me looks like an invitation for critters to come visit. So who knows, you could have rats, mice, raccoons, possums, all kinds of critters interested in your compost. So I would work harder to bury your food waste so that it does not look like that. This pile on the left here looks like they've made just a cylinder out of some galvanized hardware cloth, and you can sort of see they made a layer of looks like grass clippings and compost and leaves, some more soil, maybe some straw, something like that, more leaves. So that's a neat view of a layered pile, but I wouldn't leave it like that. I would mix it around so that all of the leaves are mixing with the grass clippings and mixing with the soil, especially because grass clippings can compress and actually cause a lot of trouble. Sometimes when grass clippings sit in a compost pile and haven't been mixed around with something dry like leaves, what can happen is they start to decompose, and because it's very heavy and moist, it can get kind of slimy and really disgusting and smelly. And what's happening there is that the grass has compressed so much that all the air that's been in that layer is kind of squeezed out. And what starts to happen is anaerobic bacteria start growing, and they make very smelly byproducts. So you're better off mixing that moist grass clippings with something dry like those leaves. Okay, so here are a couple different designs of compost bins that you can get depending on where you live. You can get one of these from the town that you live in. The DPW and many local towns sell these. The three on the left are called the New Age Composter. The one on the right is called the Earth Machine. And later on in my presentation, I have a link to, there's a page on the Mass DEP's website that has a link of what cities and towns are selling these. There's a subsidized program that makes these available to residents at a pretty low cost. So I would encourage you to look into that. These are all pictures of compost bins at schools, but like I said, they are available to residents at a pretty reasonable price. The ones at schools, interesting thing, there's a program called the Green Team. If anybody out there is a teacher, if you want one of these for your school, you can actually sign up to be a member of the Green Team, and you can get one of these for free. You have to go pick it up, but it is free, which is a great program. So here are some designs that you can build. The one on the left is a pallet bin. You can tell they just have taken a couple pallets. Looks like they've nailed it together. It's hard to tell in this picture, but my community garden, we made one of these out of pallets, and we used, I think we used a 2x2 or maybe a 4x4 in the corners to kind of brace these together. And as you can see, they made a door on this one. And it looks like there's a bungee, and there must be some kind of a hinge to keep this together. So, there are plans available online. And the only thing I would say about that is, obviously that's with those big slats there, that's not going to keep critters away. That's really more for sort of keeping things from falling all over the place and just kind of containing the material, but that will not be animal proof. Same thing with the one on the right. This was built by a guy I know in Cohasset, and as you can see, he's got a 3-bay system. I'm a big fan of the 3-bay system, and you can see his labels here. He's got one that's labeled add, that's number 1. Number 2 is labeled cook, and number 3 is labeled take. So number 1 obviously is the pile that you're adding to. So as you're doing your spring cleanup, or you're pulling out vegetables that are done growing, you grow a crop of lettuce or something like that, and once it's done growing, you're going to take that lettuce out and put something else in. You put that in your add to pile. Or when you take your tabletop compost bin out to the compost pile, you put it in the add. Again, mix it with leaves, make sure that you mix it around really well. If you mow your lawn, make sure you mix it around really well. One of the nice features of this bin system that he made, I don't know if you can tell, but the front piece is actually one a set of pieces that are nailed together, and that front opens up, just slides up the top. There's a groove along the side, and slides up and out, and then you can get in there with your garden fork and turn things around. And the number 2 cook, the idea for that one, you can tell that one's full, and he's just letting it sit there and do its cooking or decomposing, which may take a couple of months. And then when the stuff is finished decomposing, that becomes the take pile, and then you take this stuff out of there and you use it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Here's a nice rat-proof system. I have these plans. If anybody wants, I can send you a link to, this is a 2-bay system, but I have a link for either a 2 or a 3-bay system. And you can tell this one is lined with chicken wire, and it looks like the top has some kind of a plastic sheeting. And the bottom of this is also lined with chicken wire. So if you live in a place where you think mice or rats or chipmunks, squirrels, skunks, any animal is going to be a problem, this might be a good design for you. And this is also a good design for somebody who's concerned about rats. This is a tumbler system, and these are off the ground and very critter proof, because it would not be easy for any animals to get in this. So there's pros and cons to these. Pro is that they're very easy to use. As you can see, the one on the right, the door is open. Just load your stuff in. Make sure you've got your proper mix of browns and greens. These kinds of systems, you really want to make sure that you have added a shovelful of decomposers, soil, or finished compost every once in a while, because this material in this bin is not going to be in contact with the ground. So the natural decomposers that are in the ground can't get up into the material. The only way that they could get into the bin is if you add them. So you have to be really sure to make sure that that happens. The cons are that because they're not on the ground, like I said, it's not, you have to really work hard to make sure that you get decomposing bacteria in there. Now the other con is because they're all sealed up, but the one on the left, as you can see, is in bright sunshine. And if that sat in the sun all day long, all the material in there would cook. And I don't mean cook in a good way. I mean cook like potentially burn up, which would not be good. You actually could kill the microbes that are living in there. And I would not recommend leaving it in the sun. But they're very easy to turn, and mixing a big compost pile is a lot of work. And so something like this could be a good choice. You don't want to spend the money to purchase one of those, and they can be very expensive, easily over $100 or $150 or more. You can certainly make one. This is an easy DIY project. That's just a black plastic trash can. You can see they've drilled some holes in the top and the sides. Add your material, make sure the top is very securely fashioned, turn it on its side, and mix, mix, mix. Same rules as the other kind of tumbler bin. Make sure that you've taken some soil or some finished compost and add it to that bin so that you have added decomposers. Okay, so just a quick rundown of who sells what kind of bins. This information gets updated annually by the DEP. As of last time I checked, Cohasset sells the Earth Machine. According to their website, it says you must be a resident, but I happen to know a friend of mine went to Cohasset and was able to buy a bin even though he didn't live there. Braintree sells the Earth Machine and the New Age composter. And Marshfield and Quincy, there you can see the whole list. As of right now, there are none for sale in Hull or Scituate, Weymouth or Norwell, but you can buy these at Lowe's, Home Depot, you can buy them online. And that link there at the bottom is the link to the list that comes from the state that'll tell you who's got what for sale. Okay, so as I have been saying many times over and over, what is it that's making compost happen? Well, it's really the microbes. A lot of times when we dig into compost piles at the farm, the kids get very excited when they see the worms. The worms are cute, and kids love holding them, but it's really the bacteria and the fungi that are living in the compost pile that do all the work. The worms are kind of the finishers. They come in and they actually are eating the bacteria and the fungi that are in the pile, but it's really those bacteria and fungi that are doing the work. There's also things that are bigger and have teeth, which worms, of course, do not. Ants and spiders and beetles and things like that have chopper mouth parts. And they do this job of sort of physically chopping things into smaller pieces so that the microbes can continue the work. And it's really the just time and making sure that the material is wet and mixing and turning, and all that together is what makes compost happen. Here's a really nice food web of the compost pile infographic. This is also on the Mass DEP's website, broken down into groups, and you can see the top are those beetles that I talked about, things that have chopper mouth parts, and then the things to the right, earthworms and smaller things that you can see with your naked eye. And then in the bottom left are all the things that you can't see with your naked eye. You would need a microscope, and those are, you know, the bacteria and fungi that are doing the work of decomposition. All these things together make up a great ecosystem or food web of a compost pile. So if you've mixed your pile properly, and if it's a good size, and by good size, I mean that new age composter, that round black cylinder, the bigger of the two of them. I have 3 of those in my yard, and they hold about almost a yard of material. And if it's full and mixed and the right moisture, your pile can potentially get to be a hot enough temperature to kill weed seeds. And as you can see in this thermometer, this pile is over 140. I turned my pile recently, and I was really happy to see that my temperature, it's not quite 140. Last time I checked, it was about 110. That may or may not kill the any weed seeds, and not even weed seeds, but for example, like if you have a cucumber, or when you eat a butternut squash, you don't eat the seeds. Usually you take the seeds out of the butternut squash and then you bake the squash in the oven. So those seeds from that squash actually may turn up as something growing in your compost if your compost doesn't get hot. Not the end of the world, but you know, if you're really picky about your compost and don't want to have to pull out a bunch of volunteers, we call them, basically tomatoes that come from tomato seeds and compost, or squash seeds from that butternut squash. The only way to prevent that is to make sure your compost gets really hot and all those weed seeds get killed. Oops, sorry. Okay, everybody wants to know this. How long will it take to make your finished compost? Well, it depends on the temperature of the pile, and it depends on what you've mixed in. If your compost is just leaves, that's going to take a lot longer. If you're mixing in food waste, grass clippings that have a lot of nitrogen, if you turn it very often, if you make sure the moisture is you know, the correct wrung out sponge kind of consistency, well, you may have finished compost in as short as 8 weeks. If you put a lot of stalky materials in, like I was just cleaning out my garden beds the other day, and I had some plant stems and some sunflower stalks from last year, well, they're not going to decompose so fast. But you know, you can sift those out, and the stuff that is decomposed you can use. So how do you know when you're done? Well, it should look brown or very dark brown. It should be that crumbly, earthy smelling. You shouldn't see the starting materials, so you know, you shouldn't see any food ingredients. Some things do take longer to decompose than others. So for example, an avocado pit may take a couple of may take a full year to decompose. I always find cobs of corn in my compost. So from last summer, when we were having corn on the cob a lot, when I go now in the spring and go look at my compost, I might find last summer's corn cobs that are not quite finished decomposing. But again, that's okay, because I can sift those out and put them back in the bin. But the way you tell that it's ready is because it should smell good, and in general, you shouldn't see a lot of what you started with. And the temperature will be ambient, will not be hot. If it's not cooled down to ambient temperature, then it's probably not done. Okay, so here's that sifter that I was referring to earlier. So I have a wheelbarrow and a sifter that's just made out of 2x4s with some galvanized hardware cloth nailed on there. And basically you put the compost on top of the sifter and you either shake the sifter back and forth or just rub it with your hands. And the stuff that falls through the sifter into the wheelbarrow is the finished compost, and anything that doesn't fall through, sticks that haven't decomposed, or that avocado pit that I mentioned, just toss it back in the bin and let it keep, let those microbes keep working on it. Okay, so what do you do with it? Well, I've mentioned a couple times that you can use it in your garden or on your grass, but if you are not a vegetable gardener, don't be discouraged. You can use compost on your flower garden. If you don't have a flower garden and all you have are a few oak trees in your yard, by all means, give it to your oak tree or your favorite lilac or rose bush. Um, if you are gardening for vegetables, then great, dig a hole, and every time you plant something, put it in the hole, mix it in, scatter it around your perennials, make a potting soil, make compost tea, put it on your lawn, give it away. Remember, you're saving from sending things to trash. You're making a valuable resource. People pay money for it. As you know, you can go to a garden center and buy bags of composted manure. So why not make your own? So what can go wrong? Well, like I said before, that untended pile that had that pumpkin sticking out, well, you can easily attract unwanted animals. I one time many years ago had a nest of rats in my compost. That was not a pleasant experience. If you didn't mix it up properly, like I told that story before about grass clippings, if you don't mix them up with something a little more dry, like leaves, you might get some really stinky, smelly compost. You might get some puddles of leachate. Leachate is just like the moisture from fruits and vegetables sort of leaching out from the pile. But if you mix a lot of dry ingredients, that'll absorb the water and you won't get stinky, smelly puddles of leachate. You can get fruit flies and other fly infestations. But again, if you've mixed properly, that won't happen. And snow. Well, so where I used to live, actually, my compost was on the other side of a snowbank. And every time it snowed, we had our driveway plowed, and it was really hard to get to the compost because it was on the other side of the snowbank. So I started making worm compost in my garage as a result of that. It is very difficult to manage compost in the winter. I will say that. But like I said, there are ways around that. So here's what's going on under the soil. And actually, I forgot to put a credit. This is from actually Colorado State University, beautiful graphic that I found. Here's what's going on. So as you know, plants take the energy of the sun and carbon dioxide from the air, and they turn it into sugar, right? And mix the carbon-based sugar that we eat, right? So when you're eating lettuce, you may not think you're eating sugar, but you are. And nature has evolved into this wonderful symbiotic relationship where plants, not only do they make sugar in the form of stuff we eat in the plant, but they also send sugar out through their roots into the soil to feed the bacterial life that's in the rhizosphere, the area of the soil, that layer of soil that's right around plants' roots. And it's a great way for plants to make sure that those bacteria that are in the soil near the roots have food to live, and that sugar that's comes out of the roots of those plants, leaks out of the roots of those plants, is the food for the bacteria. Okay, and you want a lot of bacteria in your soil because those bacteria are taking all of those minerals that are in that lower level of soil, that parent material where all the minerals come from, and they're turning it into minerals that those plants can use. A plant can't take magnesium, for example, out of the soil. It has to get made into a form of magnesium that can be absorbed by the roots of the plants, and the bacteria in the soil are what do that. So the way you get bacteria in your soil is by adding compost, by planting cover crop, by mulching with leaves, some strategies that make a rich, diverse microbial community in your soil. So the other thing that's going on in the soil is those microbes, not only are they mobilizing nutrients so that the plants can absorb them, but they're fixing carbon in terms of, they're making humus, and which, as I said earlier, is a long chain carbon molecule that is stable in the soil. And that's what I mentioned earlier about how scientists are trying to figure out how to quantify this so that they can pay farmers to invest in a number of different strategies to keep carbon in the soil so that it can actually take it out of the atmosphere as a way of addressing climate change. Stay tuned, more on that coming. So just a little bit about what we at Holly Hill are doing. This is a picture of a kind of a sad thing that happens every once in a while. We get a lot of food waste from local food pantries. Excuse me. And food that's spoiled and has is past its prime, and rather than throwing it in the trash, we take it and make compost out of it. Excuse me. We also collect some food waste from some local restaurants and coffee shops, and we don't have a big food waste collection business, just enough to make enough compost to meet the needs of the farm. We're basically taking about 30 of those 5-gallon buckets a week from, like I said, some restaurants, food pantries, and whatnot in the area. And we take about 1,500 pounds a week, mix it with leaves, manure from the horse or the pony on the farm, and the donkey, the chickens, things like that, and leaves. And we mix it up, and we're making compost for the farm. We don't sell it. For the most part, we're just using it for the farm's fields. So here are some teens as part of our farm to food pantry program. And as you can see, they've got some buckets of what looks like food waste, and some cardboard, and some straw, and some maybe some shavings from the horse pen, horse stall. And they're going to mix all that up and take it down to our compost area. It's not a great picture, but this is what our aerated static composting area looks like. And as I said, we're making about 50 yards of compost a year in this little system. And I can tell you more about it if you want. You can get in touch with me. But basically, this is how we are saving about 1,500 pounds of food waste per week from being burned. So some interesting stats from last year. As I said, we take about 1,500 pounds a week. So that's about 45,000 pounds of food waste from the trash. So that's 22 tons, a little over. And the EPA estimates that for every ton of food waste that's composted, it saves 0.76 metric tons of carbon dioxide from the air. So that's our contribution to solving climate change at Holly Hill Farm. I also saw an estimate that for every ton of food waste, it saves as much emissions as if 392 gallons of gas were burned for every ton of food waste. So we estimate that we're saving over 8,000 gallons of fuel from being burned by composting on the farm. So what can you as one person do? Well, besides generating compost that you're going to use in your garden, if you save about 10 pounds of food waste per week from the trash, not a huge impact, but obviously if you add that up over the course of what your whole town throws away, and as I said earlier, Hingham in 2019 threw away 5,444 tons of trash, and about a third of that is compostable food waste, estimated to be compostable food waste. So that would save about 640,000 gallons. The emissions that 640,000 gallons burning that much fuel would create. It's a lot. It adds up to be a lot. So as I said, composting is not only has environmental benefits, but pretty big economic ones as well. So I mentioned this before about what's going on with plants sequestering carbon. Well, as those sugars leak out of the roots and feed microbes. This is also from Colorado State University. I like this diagram. They have these soil carbon molecules, and the way they explain it is that this microscopic mineral associated organic matter is kind of like a savings account for the soil, which is a neat way of putting it. It's basically sequestered carbon that's going to stay in the soil bank for a long time, which is a neat concept. It's a neat way of explaining the fact that when soil is well balanced and there's lots of microbes in the soil and the soil is covered, as you can see, they've sort of that green looks like leaves or something like that covering the soil, or not, or maybe a cover crop. That is, basically it keeps the microbes in the soil, keeps the carbon in the soil, that is a good system there. That's what we are doing at Holly Hill Farm. That's what regenerative farming, you may have heard that word, regenerative soil management practices. That's what we're doing. Basically keeping the microbes in the soil happy, keeping the carbon in the soil, and it improves plant growth as well. So this is my contact information. If you have any questions, there are a lot of great resources on the Mass DEP's website. There's great information on the EPA's website. And I would encourage you to become a home composter. It's really not that easy. Excuse me, it's really not that hard. It's very easy. And I hope that you will consider starting a compost pile this year. Know that it's going to have a big impact on the environment, and it's going to have a big impact on the bottom line. Thanks very much.